This project was born from the idea of creating a 3D stroke effect. This is a thing that illustrators have been doing for years. You see like the strokes go inside and out some areas. It creates like a chaotic looking, but you can still barely see the shape and the volume the artist is creating. Here, I wanted to do the same. Now, the Sculpt has its own difficulties to do this effect because all the volume is already there. So how can I create these strokes and feel them like natural, organic, fluid? Maybe you are thinking that this is an easy and quick project. More there are others that spend a lot of hours because you see all the strokes, all the freedom there that flows in all the figure. But in my case, it was one of the most difficult projects that I've been in years. And the thing is that I wanted this project to be easy, to get out the stress I had of painting the last figure, but was the opposite. I had in my mind that I wanted a creative exercise, but instead I had to think a lot how to do things. In this video, I will show you how, and I hope you learn. When I plan a project like this, I do it to relax, to work my creativity, and to do it quickly. There's not a better place to do it than in a forest. The objective of the exercise is doing what you want with the paint, with anything in mind, just freedom with the stroke, and without fears to get it wrong. Placing the color where the moment and the figure tells you. Here we are working that side of the brain that only paints and doesn't consider following any reference or guide. You paint through your heart. It's discovering again the pleasure of painting like when we were childs. This idea is really nice. But it's a lie. Do you really think that it's possible to do it easily always? To always flow? Painting with nothing in your head? No. The reality was that they didn't knew how to paint with this technique. It was one of the first time I was trying it and I was lost. I faced a lot of walls because I didn't knew how to execute the technique. And this reminds me a lot some of the questions that you guys send me. For example, not knowing how to do the glaze pointing technique. I felt that frustration, although this always wasn't like that. When I was having fun, when I was flowing with the paint, when I was happy with the results, I felt great. But when I faced a wall, a problem that I didn't know how to solve, I felt lost. And my brain offered me two kinds of different approach. First one was, okay, you know a lot of things. Let's get that knowledge, and for example, to paint a breast, you know where the lights and shadows go, you know the volume. So follow it with unique strokes. The problem was when that strokes were ugly, were not interesting, and the results were quite bad. So the solution was to master my skills, my technique, and the frustrations will go because there's nothing better to be able to do whatever you imagine in reality. But this is really easy to say, not to do. The question here would be how I faced these technique problems. I just tried to reinterpret the stroke 1, 2, or even 10 times, doing little modifications of the shape of it, handling the brush on a different way, or even changing the side of the brush. Don't worry, because I will go deeper later. Imagine in your case you have a problem with the glaze pointed technique. Well, you have to get that mistakes and give it a twist. Try doing slightly different things than always. For example, add a bit more of water to the strokes, or the opposite, add a bit more of paint. Change the position of the hands over the table to have more control. Spread out more the dots, use washes, and study references. And insist on doing small different kind of process each time. Another truth is that you have to forget the idea of doing the things at the first time, even after the 5th time. This helps a lot not getting frustrated, because the more you practice, the more you will learn the tools to do the things you want. Also, you have to be friend of the trial and error. This is the fastest way to learn, knowing how to fix your mistakes and losing the fears of doing them. And the last truth I will talk about is that not always you enjoy painting. There's sometimes when you face a lot of problems, you suffer a lot, but it's a nice suffering, because the brutal satisfaction comes to you when you finish a project that was difficult, that you learn a lot, that you try things 100 times until you got it. And in the end, this lesson tells me that the clue is that I have to know when to flow, having nothing in mind, and when to think how to face painting problems. With last practice done, it's time to face the principal effect of the project. A 3D stroke going on and doing it in a way that's fluid and organic. I will use green putty to create the shapes, but here comes the first problem. How can I create a natural and artistic stroke looking if I don't know, for example, what is the paint stroke that comes before? This meant that I had to do 2 different processes, one before the other one. But maybe you are thinking that this is not a problem. To understand it, let's look how a 2D canvas painter works. He has the freedom to start and end the stroke whatever he wants, because he has the support of the background. We, painters of Sculpt, have the limitations of their own volumes that are already created. And precisely that possibility of not stopping your stroke doesn't stop your creativeness. Again, the problem was how to create organic strokes if I had to stop between the stroke and the paint process. So I had these 2 different ideas. The first and the most simple one was, okay, I finished the figure, I finished creating and experimenting with the paint strokes, and then I create the 3D strokes and start sticking them through the shapes of paint. But this has some downsides. For example, it was really difficult to find the correct shape, and maybe the previous paint will be damaged. Second option, the opposite. First, I will create the shapes, trying to do interesting strokes, and then place it in a figure in areas that I would think it will fit in the future painting process. But here comes the first problem. I had to imagine where those strokes will fit in a further stage of painting. This will be a really difficult thing to do, also without too much creativity. Or that's what I thought in that moment. So imagine, I was really lost. I didn't know what process to choose first. After having a break and thinking, I had this idea. I will use Photoshop to create a quick sketch and join these 2 processes to tell me where to place the strokes. I use the color to follow the lines and shapes of the muscle, creating strategic and interesting strokes, like for example in the hair you can see a little curve. I create a line in the shoulder. For example, look at the jaw. I create here a secondary source of light. And I experiment painting parts of the skin going inside the background area until I create an interesting sketch to use as a guide to start working. With this sketch, it was easier to do the sculpts first and then painting them. To do them, just get a glass or a plastic with water, then create little lines with green putty, and with different tools you have to simulate the strokes of the paint. Try to create organic and natural shapes. The interesting thing is creating different sides and playing with the shapes. And here comes the fun part. Get a stroke and try to find the match of the volume. You can see here this has the same sides of the bone. You will find that some strokes fits perfectly in some areas. At this moment it was easier to follow the sketch guide to create interesting strokes. But as I was sticking the pieces, a very curious thing happened to me. I was leaving aside the visual guide, and I found myself just taking the piece that was perfect for that side of volume, playing with my creativity and deciding in that moment if they fit or not. All the important decisions were made there and not how I planned. I discovered that a big part of the knowledge came when I just did things instead of thinking them. And in a spontaneous way, the moment was giving me the gift of flowing and having fun. I just searched for an interesting stroke and start experimenting over the figure, trying to fit it in the perfect area. It's interesting because I never thought that this mechanical process was so fun and so creative. Look how I created interesting strokes, having a circle over the head to look at it at the first sight, and in the other parts of the body I created like an arrow to guide your vision. In the face, for example, I played a lot with future strokes in light that will go out that area. It's time to work the color. I create my own mixes with the primary colors, adding magenta to it. And you can see there I created 5 or 6 tones of orange, and I do the same with the rest of the secondary color. You can see there an interesting purple, a green, even browns, grays, blacks, etc. You have a complete guide in other videos. Let's start painting. Here I mix all the wet colors over the figure, trying to create volume, always with thick paint. In a few minutes staining, we have the light sketched. Here I change the brush for a smaller size because I want more control and smaller details. This is a thing I will do through the process, depending on the results and the shapes I want. Here I'm adding a lot of saturation, trying to find out what I wanted, playing a bit with the color. Little by little you can see interesting strokes. And here I start feeling the first difficulties with the technique. As you see, I have the hair of the brush a bit opened and with really thick paint, trying to find an interesting stroke. And the results are really bad for me. I can't find them. But I continue experimenting and learning that, for example, in the chest there will be larger strokes than in the face or smaller features.
I've been searching for that love that I once had lost, but it's deeper within, deeper within, deeper within. That's where it all begins. Learn to love yourself.
I start changing the temperature of the figure, choosing a cold tone for the right side, and also maximize the power of the shadow, adding a dark blue on them. Here the curious thing is that the orange of the skin and the blue of the shadows are complementary colors, but I was painting without thinking or paying attention to anything, just trying to solve and learn how to do the stroke technique.
Seem to find it. Took my energy when I was heavily invested. Then I looked within and I had found the right direction. Better to love than to never at all. How you gonna stand without learning to fall? It didn't work, but you gotta be strong, knowing that you hurting.
Here I'm trying to understand the technique, and slowly I'm getting to the point that quick strokes maybe is the clue. Do you see? I make quick movements with my hand and fingers.
Lost and it's deeper within, deeper within, deeper within. That's where it all begins, yes. Learn to love yourself. You need nobody.
I test and risk a lot with pure colors. Look at this blue. This is like primary blue, a really visible green. To understand that this was too much, I had to balance this approach. But first I have to test my ideas and know if I'm wrong or not. I got to the point that the more I painted, the more lost I felt. I was feeling like the brush strokes were really ugly. I didn't know how to create a visible volume inside all that chaos of strokes. So I decided to stop and think about solutions. So what if I grab the brush in the end part and just do little movements with the finger? Immediately I noticed that my strokes didn't have too much control and created more interesting shapes, like circular shapes, not so straight ones. And I started feeling again that connection with the piece, that fun.
I once had lost and it's deeper within.
Now I had two types of tools, two types of strokes to work with. Look, sometimes you just had to do slower movements to achieve different and curved strokes. There were other parts that straight lines were perfect, but in others just being patient and detailed was the clue. A lot of the times I just rethought the ideas and painted over. Look how some 3D strokes that are outside the skin are painted with the tone of the skin to represent that freedom, that creativity of the artist. here I thought, okay, I experimented with the stroke. What about experimenting with the thickness of the paint? You see, I'm getting here directly from the bottle. By the way, you can do this only with quality paints like Golden, Schmink, Scale 75 Artist. Grab a lot of it and start mixing layers to see the behavior of the paint. You can notice that this adds an extra level of or possibilities to paint with this technique. The two colors join together in a really unique and spontaneous way. This will add an extra natural and organic feeling. Another tool for our knowledge. You can see that I insist in the same area but doing little modifications in the shape, the stroke or the amount of paint. But what happens when we use aggressively this technique? We create a mess that it's really difficult to distinct and define the volumes. We could also say that this is an interesting looking if you want to achieve something like this. It's not bad, but in my case I wanted a bit more visible facial features, not so chaotic. So after redoing and reinterpreting again the same area, like you see with the face, I stopped again and used my brain. I asked myself, okay, what's missing in the skin? And I realized that the saturation and the mid-tone didn't exist, was only light and shadows. So I started placing color in that mid area. For example, here I knew how to solve the problem because of my color knowledge. Another reason to believe that you have to use both sides of the brain. Here I got to the moment that I achieved something similar to the beginnings, but the difference was that I had a lot learned. Look how over the previous interpretation that was really chaotic and quickly, I now stop and do gentle and subtle, slower details with the stroke. We went from general and big areas to small volumes. At this point, I was thinking in how much this figure changed my vision of this type of stroke and aggressive projects. I thought that expressive painting like Banshee or other artists did was more about giving quick strokes, not thinking so much. But in my case, I was slowly realizing that sometimes there were moments to give quick, aggressive, not thinking so much in the shape of the strokes. And there were other times that you have to do it slower stroke. You have to think where to place the stroke. You have to think about volume, about the correct color. And these two positions weren't opposite. They had to work together to be a better painter, to be a more complete one that will know where to use one or the other one. Pay attention to this. For this moment, for this stroke, I suffered so much. When I see this, I see an interesting stroke. I see creativity, I see naturality, and above all, I'm satisfied. I was starting to get real comfortable knowing what I was doing. Look how I use the red as a unifying color to join all the skin, and I get this skin tone to paint the strokes that are surrounding all the shape of the figure, to help creating the effect of an organized chaos. I work the secondary light over the strokes that are in the side of the jaw. I stop, analyze, and see mistakes. Here I had this shadow part too dark. Why? Because I spent all the night painting with a lot of light, and this change your vision changed a lot. When you see the figure the next day with all the light, the color changes. So the solution was to paint with a higher value than shadows, maybe with a brown. I had to change also the brush to get a big one and start changing that area. Look how better is the skin now. It's time to paint the background. Here I'm using really thick paint, white one. Remember, always with quality paints like Golden, Schmink, My Mary, Scale Artist. What I do here is create first a layer with white and then play with other tones that are included in the figure. For example, skin, the hair, red. Here I had the idea of placing white strokes of the background inside the skin of Mads. This was a really risky decision, but in the end the feeling, the looking was really interesting. I think that this was the magic touch that was missing. I remember the scare I was here because I didn't know if it would fit or not and had to paint that part again. I felt it was nearly finished, but was something missing. Do you see it? The white background was getting out the power of the max point of light of the skin. Much better now. Mikkelsen has its protagonism here, and you can see an organized chaos. I need you more. After the frustration, after redoing and rethinking parts 1, 2 or 4 times, I finished this project. Like I said in the beginning of the video, was one of the most difficult projects of the year. It reminded me few important things. How is learning new things, how to approach difficult parts, how to understand a new technique, and come out again my comfort zone is the best way to learn. I hope you enjoyed this different kind of video, and thanks a lot for being there.